When I was about 20 years old, I worked caretaking a ranch in northern British Columbia, 3 hours from the nearest hospital, very remote at the end of a long gravel road, 20 miles into the mountains. I spent 90 days in isolation. I think I saw my nearest neighbors living on a trap line 10 miles farther up the valley. I would see them once a week for coffee. I think my folks came in once or twice to bring groceries. A few strangers knocked on the door, but almost without exception, I spent 90 days in isolation. The last 8 days, I did not see a soul. I had only committed to go there for 2 weeks. It evolved, and as time went on, some things changed, and I was asked to stay longer. Initially, it was just for another week, then another week, another couple of weeks. And at each turn, I felt to press through. Determination is this curious thing. It's this prized virtue, but so difficult to acquire in our microwave society. And this place that was more or less the hardest job in my life became the proving ground for this prized virtue. In my mind, I wanted to quit. It was a battleground. I wanted to quit every day. Many times in the same day, I wanted to quit. But I pressed through, and as I look back at that season, I want to share with you something out of my journal in a moment that helped to fuel that pressing through, and even to consider all the reasons not to quit, to prize this value or this virtue of determination. At the conclusion of this experience, when I had pressed through these 90 days, it was truly like drilling through rock. It was painful. It was miserable. It was lonely. It was painful, miserable, lonely, over and over and over. It was hard. It was boring. There was little things that were beautiful about it, but there was no outside stimulation. There was no internet, and talking on a phone was a satellite phone, and that was $1,000 a month. So there were limitations to how much you could even just call someone. But as I drilled and pressed through this, what I discovered was, first of all, you can do more than you ever imagined when you take it one day at a time, and sometimes just 1 hour at a time and 1 minute at a time. And I also discovered this thing about the discipline of determination is there can be a breaking point, that you can tap into this reservoir like drilling for oil. You've drilled through a mile of the Earth's crust of difficult, and then suddenly you hit this gold mine, you hit this gusher, this wellspring, and that oil can fuel cities, it can fuel a nation. That oil, that reservoir, the power that is in that is finally unleashed and unlocked. When I finished that experience, at the end of those 90 days, I knew I had unlocked something, tapped into something, and that I was so totally changed having pressed through in those 90 days that I was unlike most any other people that I was around, that I had accessed a different wellspring or tapped into some of the deeper potential that we had as people. I'm not saying that I was better than anyone else. I don't mean that. But there's a confidence and resiliency that comes in knowing what you're made of. It was an experience that was one of the very first that helped me see what I was made of. And so I'd like to read you just this excerpt from my journal that helped to fuel and press through. I wish I could credit the author. I don't know what book it was in. I never credited the author except to quote it, so I knew it wasn't my own words. But it's a few paragraphs. I think it takes maybe 4 or 5 minutes to read, but I hope you will listen. This is truly one of the things that helped me press through and not give up. And I believe it might fuel you in whatever you're facing today. In the preparatory time of life, the real job is not what you are working on, but what it is doing to you. You start with a great gush of interest, then suddenly it goes stale, and you quit. Or you find that your plan is wrong, and you quit. All you have as profit from your effort is the knowledge of how to quit. Well, you say that the whole thing wasn't worth it. Quite probably, but you are, and that's the whole point. Mr. Ford told me that when he was making his first car, he was enthusiastically looking forward to great results. Then the thrill and interest evaporated because he'd gone far enough to see how he could build a second and better car. And the glowing new vision got in the way of his work. Some untaught inner wisdom must have warned him. For he forced himself on. He soon discovered he was learning more and more about his second car by going on to complete the first. He realized, by the strength of the temptation to quit, that it was precisely that, a temptation to quit, not merely an urge to do better. And had he yielded, he might have failed to finish the second car. Another reason to quit is not because we think we see something better, but because we see nothing at all. So why continue? Well, was this thing laid on you to do? Were your motives sound? Had you a clear right and a clear reason to start it? Very well. What has happened? Oh, a cloud has settled down and you cannot see. Well, many a man has never seen the light he needed or the work he needed until he entered that cloud and walked through it. Following faithfully on never leads anyone into permanent darkness. But for the quitter, all he'll likely get is a stronger habit of quitting and a lower place to begin again. The man who will not give up, even if he fail of his objective, is led through to another objective. The man who hangs on as if he were paid to hang on can always start again at par or better. He has strengthened himself. Most of us are where we are for very good reason. This is our past, which has no one to hold it but us. If we abandon it, we discover that it is something in ourselves we abandon. Just keeping on through the most hopeless aspect of keeping on may be the most important act of one's career. The last dejected effort often becomes the winning stroke. Most people have quit too soon. Another week, a few more good licks, standing by a little longer, and the whole situation would have opened into a larger phase. The theater of this drama is ourselves. The mind may forge a circumstance into a shackle, or it may lift us into the sphere where events are plastic. The power of courage and endurance to rearrange our whole relation to events is proved daily as one of our commonest experiences. In its loveliest form, this compulsion, this power, is simply the act of hanging on, plodding on, doggedly forcing oneself on for yet 1 hour or for one more day. Quitting makes a dead end of any road, often just as it was ready to open. Transfer if you must, catch another wavelength, change your level to a higher one, but don't quit. It is always too soon to quit. And so I leave you with that today. And I pray that you would have the strength to hang on just a bit more, and that you too would tap into those deep reservoirs and discover what you're made of in ways that you've never known before. And that would fuel many more years of incredible adventure and beauty in your life and fulfillment and meaning. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me.